Now that we've set up the columns in the truth table based on the hierarchy of logical connectives, and we have the rules for completing each column based on the connective used to build it, now we just have to complete each column. The column should be completed from left to right, and when you approach a column, you should ask yourself two questions. Question number one is, what rule am I going to do? The rule that you're going to do is dictated by the connective that you use to build the column. So just as a reminder, this was the connective we used to build the first column. This is the connective we used to build the second column. Those are pretty easy. Each column only has one connective. But the connective we used to build the third column was the conjunction in the middle. So I'm going to circle the connectives that we're focusing on in each column because those connectives will dictate the rules. What is the rule for disjunction? The rule for disjunction is false only if all F's. So I'm going to write that down here. False only if all F's. So that's the rule I'm going to do. The second question you have to ask yourself is, what columns am I going to do the rule to? That's where you look on both sides of this connective. On the left side of this connective is a P, and on the right side is a Q. So I need to go find the columns that represent P and Q. That would be these two columns. So I'm going to look at these two columns, and I'm going to do this rule. When you do a rule, you do it on a row by row basis. So focusing on these two columns, let's go to the first row, which is T and T. The rule is false only if all F's. Are these all F's? No? Then this rule doesn't apply. Go to the next one. T and F. The rule is false only if all F's. Are these all F's? No. This rule does not apply to that row. Go to the next row. FT. The rule, false only if all F's. Are these all F's? No. This rule does not apply to this row. Next row. FF. False only if all F's. Are these all F's? Yes. So according to the rule, I would write false. False because these are all F's. Now that I've applied the rule to each row, there was only one row where the rule did apply. What about the rest of the rows? Well, this rule told me where to write false. The remaining ones are all true. So the second column will be true, 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 false. And again, that's because of the rule for disjunction, which says it's only false when all of it is false. And then move to the next column. The connective we're focusing on is conjunction. The rule for conjunction is true only if all T's. Let's write that down here. True only if all T's. So that's the rule I'm going to do. Now, what am I going to do it to? To answer that, look on both sides of the connective. On the left is P, on the right is Q. So I'm still looking at these two columns, but I'm doing a different rule. If I see all T's, I'm going to write true. So let's take it row by row in the first two columns starting in the first row. T and T. Is this all T's? Yes. This rule applies to this row, and the rule says true only if all T's. Let's go to the next row. T and F. Are those all T's? No. So this rule does not apply. I don't write true there. And in the next row, it's not all T's, so the rule does not apply. And in the last row, it is not all T's, so the rule does not apply. So for the second column that we're completing over here, the only row where this rule applies is the first row. So the first row is the only row over here where I will write T in this column. That means the rest of them are not true, So the rest of them are false. And then do it again. Not to sound like a broken record, but every time you move to a column, you ask yourself two questions. What rule am I going to do, and which columns am I going to do that rule to? This last column was built on this conjunction, and the rule for conjunction is still true only if all t's. But what's different about this column than the previous one isn't the rule, it's the columns I'm going to apply it to. Let me erase these green arrows, because I may or not be pointing at those. To determine which column to use, look immediately to the left and right of the connective around which you're building the column. Immediately to the left of this connective is the open parentheses. If the thing on either side immediately is a parentheses, see what's inside the parentheses. What's inside the parentheses is P disjunction Q. So I need the column that represents P disjunction Q. That would be this column. So we're going to look at that column. Going back to the column we're completing, look to the right of it, to the right of the connective, and the symbol immediately to the right of the connective is the parentheses. Anytime the symbol on either side immediately is a parentheses, you look at the parentheses contents. So I need the column that is Q conjunction P. Now at this point I just realized something, that this was written backwards. Because recall, this was the second connective we set up. The second connective we set up was here. The symbol to the left was a Q, the symbol to the right was a P. So technically speaking, and my apologies if this was causing some confusion, this should have been a Q, this should have been a P. However, that won't change anything. Why? Because we would still be looking at the first two columns. Whether we said P and Q or Q and P, we would have still populated that column the same, true, false, false, false. There are some connectives where the order is irrelevant. Conjunction, disjunction, the order is irrelevant. In fact, the only connective where the order matters is conditional, because what you're looking for is one letter pointing towards another. Going back to the last column, we're building the column for this connective. Here's its rule. On the left was a parentheses. Its contents were in this column. On the right is another parentheses. Its contents is in this column. Every time you complete a rule, you will only look at one or two columns. Most of the time you will look at two columns. The exception is if you're doing a negation. Okay, now that we know the rule that we're going to apply, true only if all t's, and the columns to which we're going to apply it, let's apply it row by row. Let me change colors. Starting with remember we're in these two columns. Starting in the first row, the rule is true only if all t's. Is this row all t's? Remember, we're only looking at these two columns. Yes. This rule applies, true, only if all t's. Move to the next row. See if the rule applies. Are these all t's? No. Rule doesn't apply. Next row. Are these all t's? No. Rule doesn't apply. Next row. Are these all t's? No. Rule doesn't apply. The only row that applies to these two columns with that rule was the first row. So the first row is the only row where we write true, meaning in the remaining rows, we write false. And in the homework, you would type in T, F, F, and F in the blanks in the homework question. I'll do one more example in a single video, but I just want to remind you that when it comes to building and completing a truth table, there's really only two things you need to know to start it. Number one, the hierarchy of connectives will dictate the order in which you set up the columns. And number two, the rules for each connective will tell you how to fill each column. When you're completing a column, you ask yourself two questions. What rule am I going to use? That is based on the connective used to set up that column. And which previous columns am I going to apply it to? The columns that represent the left and the right sides of the connective, unless it's a negation, in which case it's only what's on the right side.